First of all, let me thank Guru Prasad sir for inviting me and giving me this opportunity to talk to you guys. And thank you for the warm introduction. I'm expecting more questions rather than me just talking because this is something which I'm really passionate about astrophysics, cosmology, various aspects of astrobiology. So it's difficult for me to stop talking. So the challenge for you is to make me stop talking and ask more questions. So it's up to you if you have anything very specific to the slide that is on the screen and something that I've said at that time. You can anytime just pitch in and ask me the question, or you can wait till the end of my part of the presentation and you can ask me the question. So it's completely up to you. I usually like to start off all my presentations in cosmology with this particular cartoon. This is one of my favorite comic strips called Calvin and Hobbes, which says if people sat outside and looked at the stars each night, I'll bet they'd live a lot differently. So it is usually said that studying astrophysics and astronomy is quite a humbling experience. You realize how vast the whole universe is and how tiny specks of insignificant particles we are in the whole scheme of things. This is, let me just quickly take the, can you see the pointer on screen?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Right. Right. So this is an actual image taken by Voyager spacecraft. It looked back and took the image of the Earth. I hope you can see this blue circle. So the dot inside is actually Earth, which is suspended on the sunbeam. So you can get a sense of what we are and who we are in the grand scheme of things. So this is from a famous documentary science show called Cosmos, which was aired quite a long back by one of the most popular science enthusiast and science communicator. Yeah, Carl Sagan, correct. So if you get a chance, please do go back and watch the series. They tried to have a reboot of it with Neil deGrasse Tyson, but I think that ran only for about one season. So if you get a chance,
There was a
please
second
do watch.
season also released about 2 years,
Oh.
2 years back.
Oh, okay, all right. And also, if you get a chance to read the book by Sagan, that is called Cosmos itself. So it's quite an interesting and fascinating read. So,
And he has another book called Pale Blue Dot, based off of this image itself.
absolutely, yes. So I see that there are quite a few of you who are familiar with his work. So this is what we are. We are here on a mote of dust suspended in a sunbeam. So just to give you an idea of what exactly I'm talking about, I'll just give you a very brief comparison. Okay. So I'm sure you are familiar with something called as the rocky planets and the gas giants.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Right. So you have these inner planets are rocky planets. That means you have solid surface to stand on. So compared to other rocky planets and the demoted dwarf planet Pluto, Earth seems to be pretty large. Venus is roughly about the size of the Earth, but it's quite hostile to life. So sometimes Venus is referred to as the evil twin of the Earth because of the similar size and hostile nature of its atmosphere. But let's zoom out a little bit and compare how Earth looks compared to the gas giants, with Jupiter being the the largest of the gas giants that we have. And compared to that, you can see how tiny Earth is. Right? Let's zoom out a little bit more and let's look at how we compare with the nearest star that we have, that is the Sun. So you can see even Jupiter, which is the largest of the planets that we have in our solar system, is quite puny compared to the Sun. But still, we can feel pretty happy, right? Our Sun is quite large, and we can be happy that at least something to do with us is quite large and filling the sky and so on and so forth. But let's compare Sun with some of the other giant stars that we have. You guys have heard of Sirius?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
It's the southern star.
Yeah.
Brightest star visible in the sky.
Right, exactly. So as you can see here, compared to Sun, Jupiter is about 1 pixel in the scale, and Earth cannot even be represented here. But you even have bigger stars. You've heard of Betelgeuse? Any news articles?
Yes.
Last
Yes.
week or 2 weeks, you would have come across the name Betelgeuse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yes. It's a supergiant star, and there was some. It had increased in brightness about a year ago.
Right.
People were thinking that it was it's starting to go supernova, but it's still just flickering on and off.
Correct. So its
So they
luminosity is
predicted to go to supernova, right?
yes,
It's
it's
predicted to go to
predicted
supernova.
that it will. Yes, yes. So I'll be talking a little bit about supernova in a bit. Okay. Yeah. But the idea, I mean, why it was on the news was because its luminosity keeps on fluctuating. It increases and decreases, and you still have larger stars. And one of the largest recorded, the most massive star, which is about 315 times the sun's mass and about 9 million times the luminosity of the sun. This is the largest recorded star in the universe yet. Okay, so just to give you an idea, the universe is filled with pretty massive and pretty energetic objects. Okay, and stars are not the most energetic objects in our universe. We will come across some of the other energetic objects also. Right. So, where did all these come from? Now, when we look out into the night sky, people started noticing towards the maybe about 100 years back. You would have heard of this guy called Edwin Hubble. Have you heard the name?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Right. The Hubble Space Telescope is named after him. Yeah. So Edwin Hubble sort of figured out in 1920s, about 100 years back, that all the nebulae, it was the galaxies were not known to exist at that time. So these patches in the sky, which were called nebulae, he noticed that all these nebulae are moving away from us. So then it kind of later we started figuring out with his observations and a few of the other observations that these nebulae are in fact galaxies of their own, and all these galaxies are moving away from us. So that kind of set people thinking, what if we rewind this video? That means all the galaxies will start coming closer towards each other as you go back in time. And this led to our interpretation that it all started with intense explosion in the beginning, which we today label as a Big Bang. Yeah, so I'm sure you would have come across this term called Big Bang.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so our current understanding of where the universe came from is called as the Big Bang model or the Big Bang cosmology. Now, a Big Bang, even though people say it is an explosion, it's not an explosion like this, like in the sense of what we can imagine or comprehend. Because this Big Bang explosion not only created all the matter and energy that we see in this universe, but it also created space and time itself. So the question what happened before the Big Bang doesn't have physical validity. Okay, because the space and time itself was created in the Big Bang. And we can try to, or rather we have understood pretty much what happens to the universe very, very close to the Big Bang, but at the exact moment of the Big Bang, what exactly happened is not yet understood. And that's what makes studying cosmology fascinating. Because there is so much still left to be understood. Yes.
How did the Big Bang happen? Like, what induced the Big Bang?
There are a lot of theories and models which try to explain that. I can briefly probably tell you the most popular opinion is something called as higher dimensional membranes collided with each other, and each collision created a Big Bang of its own. So the idea is that the Big Bang which created our universe is not a unique event. You also could have parallel universes with parallel Big Bangs that would have created. Of course, I'm not going to get into the technicalities of that because we need to understand what exactly do we mean by higher dimensional space-time, etc., which comes from a certain theoretical aspect called as the string theory, which I'll not be talking about because you need a separate course for that. The best answer I can give you right now is we still don't understand how the Big Bang happened.
And sir, Hawking, what he came up, what he believed is that at the quantum scale, we can notice matter appearing and disappearing in an instant. And because the universe itself was so dense at the moment of the Big Bang, it was very possible that the universe would have just appeared just like that.
Yeah, so there is something called as the vacuum fluctuation, which triggered the expansion of the universe into something called the inflation model, which I'll briefly get into. And there are also models and theories which try to explain this quantum nature of the Big Bang. Yes, you're right. In fact, one of my recent papers, we discuss about the quantum nature of the Big Bang, initial phase of the Big Bang cosmology. So you're right, yes. So, so now getting back to what happened with the Big Bang, after the initial explosion, the universe expanded. And this is your basic idea of, you have learned about gas laws already?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Right. So as a universe expands, that is, as the volume increases, your densities obviously will decrease, and the temperature decreases, and the corresponding energies decrease. Right. It's typical of any gas also that you have. Right. In a balloon, if you were to blow up the balloon, without any added matter inside, if you were to expand the balloon, the matter will the amount of substance will remain the same, but the density will decrease. All right. Yeah. Now, like I mentioned, at the point of Big Bang, we really don't understand what happened because all known laws of physics breaks down. Okay, but we can get very, very, very close to the point of Big Bang. In fact, that point in time is called as a Planck era. Have you, in chemistry at least, you would have come across Max Planck and Planck's constant?
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So it's the same guy, Max Planck, and it's named after him. It's called as a Planck time, and the corresponding era is called as a Planck era or the Planck epoch. As you can see, the time it is about
Sir, is it
10 to the
similar
power
to
of
Planck's constant?
It's not same as Planck's constant. Planck's constant gives you the quantum nature of physical reality. Okay, so if you have come across quanta and certain introduction to quantum theory,
Yes,
at least in chemistry, yeah, in chemistry you would have come across the idea of photons and so on, right? That's the whole basis of quantum
Yes, sir.
theory. The reason why quantum world exists is because the Planck's constant is not equal to 0. You know the value of Planck's constant? Roughly?
About 6.26 into 10 to the power minus 34 or something.
Right. It's about 10 power minus 34. Right. If Planck's constant was 0, then none of this quantum physics will exist. The very fact that Planck's constant is not 0 is why we have a quantum world. And the value of Planck's constant, as you have told me, it is extremely small, 10 to the power of minus 34 in SI units, right, joule second. That is also the reason why the quantum effects don't appear in everyday life. It's not there in the macroscopic world. It exists only in the microscopic world because the value is very small. But this,
Sir, can you explain the significance of Planck constant?
right, the Planck's constant tells you the quantum nature of the physical world. So when you say quantum, you're basically talking about systems which are becoming discrete. Okay, so let me take the example of light. You're familiar with the wave nature of light?
Yes, sir.
Right. And waves by definition are continuous, right?
Yes, sir.
Waves by definition are continuous, right? You have your peaks and troughs, it's continuous, right? So that's a classical picture. All right. On the other hand, when you introduce quantum nature to this, you're familiar with the photon nature of light now? Each packet having an
Yes,
energy.
Particle.
Exactly. That's a particle nature of light. So that is a quantum nature because now you're converting your continuous wave nature into discrete packets. So when you say you're quantizing a system, when you're making something quantum, you're converting something continuous to something discrete. Okay, so how does that manifest? How does that come about? Is through your Planck's constant. I hope I'm able to sort of convey the meaning.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Sir,
Yes.
how do we know that the universe expands?
How we know that the universe expands is because you have come across something called as Doppler effect.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Right, and the basic idea of Doppler effect is whenever you have a source and an observer, and then when they move relative to each other, the frequency of the wave emitted by the source and what is received by the observer will be different. And this shift in the frequency is called as Doppler shift. Isn't that what you have come across as far as Doppler effect is concerned? Right. Now, this is the same logic cops used to catch you if you're speeding. The radar gun uses the same logic. There's the same logic used in sports to figure out the speed of a delivery in cricket or the speed of serve in tennis. All right, that's your Doppler effect. All right. Now, the same thing in the case of radar guns and in cricket and tennis, the wave used is your sound wave usually. All right. Whereas in the case of cosmology and astrophysics, the waves used are light waves. So what happens is you look at a galaxy which is far away, not our own galaxy. The galaxy we live in is called the Milky Way galaxy. So you look at some other galaxy. We know exactly what are the colors and the wavelengths and frequencies emitted by those galaxies, because we can exactly predict the nuclear reactions happening in those stars, in those galaxies. So you know exactly what should be the wavelength emitted, what should be the frequency emitted, and now when you detect it on Earth, you see that those frequencies are shifted. So this is the Doppler shift. By measuring how much is the frequency shifted, we can figure out the speed with which the galaxies are moving. And by figuring out whether the frequencies are getting increased or decreased, you can figure out whether the object, in this case the galaxy, is moving away from you or coming towards you. And by looking at this Doppler effect, Hubble, whom I mentioned earlier, was able to figure out that these galaxies are moving away from us. Okay, that's how we know, and this happens for all the galaxies, pretty much all the galaxies that we have observed. I'm saying pretty much because our neighboring galaxy is called, any idea? Which is our immediate neighboring galaxy?
Andromeda.
Right. The Andromeda
Sir,
galaxy
excuse me, sir.
happens. Yes.
So, is it by the redshift you observe that galaxy?
Exactly. Exactly. It's by measuring the redshift. I didn't use the term redshift, blueshift. When the frequencies are decreasing, it's going towards a red color of the Vibgyor spectrum. On the other hand, if the frequencies are increasing, it's going towards a blue color of your Vibgyor spectrum. So if the source is moving away from us, it's called the redshift, and when it's coming towards you, it's called as a blue shift. So most of the galaxies, except Andromeda, are redshifted. That's how we know that the universe is expanding. Now, Andromeda is getting blue shifted because it is gravitationally bound to our Milky Way. That's why they are moving towards each other. That has nothing to do with the universe's expansion. The universe is expanding, but Andromeda and the Milky Way happens to be stuck together like how Earth and the Moon is stuck together by their gravity. Right? Same way, Andromeda and the Milky Way are stuck together by their mutual gravitational interaction. That's why Andromeda and Milky Way are coming towards each other. Whereas all the other galaxies are moving away from us because we observe them to be redshifted. Does that answer that question?
Yes, sir.
So what if they are just moving away? Like that doesn't mean the whole universe is expanding, right? So how do
right. The idea is when we say the galaxies are moving away from each other, we mean that the space occupied by the galaxies themselves it's getting stretched out. So imagine something like this. The most common analogy given is, imagine you have a balloon with spots on them, and each spot represents a galaxy. So if I were to blow the balloon, the spots are not moving anywhere, but the balloon itself, which has the spots in them, is getting stretched out. So it appears as if the spots are moving away from each other, right? So same way, the space in which the galaxies are itself is moving away from, it's expanding. So the expansion of space in turn makes it appear as these are getting stretched out. So it's the space which is getting expanded, and how we know that the space is getting expanded is because of a related effect of Doppler effect called as cosmological redshift. Yes.
Sir, you had told that the Andromeda galaxy and Milky Way galaxy are coming closer together due to the blue light.
Because of blue shift. Yes.
Yeah, blue shift. Sorry. So, do you think they'll come closer and stay at a point like how the Earth and the Moon is, or do you think they'll collide?
That's interesting. They will actually collide. So what will happen is galaxies are known to merge. So we have witnessed mergers of galaxies elsewhere in the universe. And in few billions of years, so nothing for us to be worried about yet, in few billions of years, the Milky Way galaxy and the Andromeda galaxy are going to come together and merge. And it will become a single galaxy, and the proposed name for that galaxy is called Milkomeda galaxy. That is a merged, not very creative name, but still, it's the merged galaxy of Milky Way and the Andromeda, which will happen few billion years down the line. All right. Yes, but they will merge. They will not stop at a certain distance. They will merge.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
So if the two galaxies merge, is there a possibility that the Earth will get destroyed in the process?
Now, in the case of Andromeda and Milky Way, the merger is going to happen few billion years down. Earth is going to get destroyed much sooner than that. I will get to the reason how Earth is going to get. That is because of how the sun is going to behave after about 5 billion years. Okay, but the chances of but I get the logic of your question. The chances of individual stars in two galaxies colliding is very rare. Okay, the cross section of that collision is very rare. In fact, the person who actually mathematically worked out that number was you heard of this guy called Subramaniam Chandrasekhar?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so he is the one who actually figured out. He was the one who gave the cross-sectional values of how rare the collisions between even even if you have two galaxies approaching each other, the stars actually colliding with each other is very rare. So they will actually miss each other because the space between stars is quite large. Right? So, but I get your
Sir,
logic.
when the
There is
collisions occur, will the galaxies become one?
it will become one. It will be a distorted galaxy. We know that the galaxy that we live in and the Andromeda galaxy, they are spiral galaxies. But when they collide and merge into one, it will become a distorted galaxy and eventually settle into something called an elliptical galaxy. Okay.
Sir, what else is that we ourselves are not in a coexisting galaxy? Like distorted.
Because we have imaged our galaxy very well. We know the shape and the structure of the galaxy very well from different observations, which I'm going to show you an image of.
Sir?
Yeah.
Sir, are there any chances of two galaxies moving away from each other? For example, Andromeda and our galaxy.
No, because since they are gravitationally bound together, they will not be moving away because you need some kind of trigger for the moving apart to happen. Since they are already gravitationally bound, there is no chance of them moving away from each other. But like I mentioned, all the other galaxies are moving away from us. That has to do with the initial Big Bang expansion.
Sir, doesn't that contradict the expanding universe theory?
No. This is a special case because it's due to the gravitational effect of the two galaxies. It has nothing to do with the Big Bang expansion.
Excuse me, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, actually, there is a question from Yajur, but since he's facing a problem with the microphone, he has asked me to ask a question.
Sir. Yeah, sure.
So the question is that Big Bang theory is a theory with substantial evidence, but is it possible that there can be a better theory that will supersede the Big Bang?
Yes. Right now, from all our observational evidence, so ultimately, how beautiful or elegant our theory is, it should always conform and match with observations. So even if you have a very interesting theory and very mathematically elegant and beautiful theory, if it does not match with observations, then the theory is no longer valid. Okay. So Big Bang theory is currently not the most elegant theory in the sense. I already got a question where how did the Big Bang happen, and we don't have a clear answer. Right. So even though it does have few issues like these, it is the most consistent theory with observations. There are quite a number of observations. I'll get to a couple of them in a bit. It is the most consistent theory with observations, and that's why today we accept Big Bang theory as the theory to explain the existence and evolution of the universe. But like you mentioned, if there comes a better theory, right? if there is a theory which can beautifully explain why the Big Bang happened or how all the matter and energy and space-time came into existence, then and if it matches with all the other predictions of the observations that we have, then of course the Big Bang theory will no longer be the number one theory to explain it. It will be superseded by some other better theory. Yes, there is the possibility.
So can you state
excuse
few
me, sir.
evidences for Big Bang?
Sorry, come again.
Can you state few evidences for Big Bang?
Yeah, I'll get to that. I'll get to a couple of them. Okay.
Sir, actually, I have a question, sir.
Yeah.
That I had come across some news that the Big Bang happened because the Big Bang happened after another event called as the Big Crunch, which is actually the ending of another universe.
That is just a hypothesis as of now, because we don't know what happened at or before the Big Bang. So there is no observational evidence to suggest what happened before the Big Bang, whether there was another universe with a Big Crunch. I will talk about Big Crunch towards the end of my presentation. Okay, but what I can tell you now is there is no evidence to suggest what happened before the Big Bang. Yeah, somebody else was asking.
Yeah, this is not a bit off topic, but since we are seeing planets, for example, 65 million light years away, like how they were 65 million years ago, doesn't that mean that us searching for alien civilizations might be a bit futile, because we might not be seeing their existence because we are seeing their planets and everything else from so long ago?
You're talking about the existence of other civilizations. Alright. It is a very real possibility. The only thing is we have not detected anything so far. So there is a very
One second. And dear students, just I'm very happy that you're all excited to ask a lot of questions. Okay, so I have a small request. That is, we will allow him to go little bit further for the next 20 minutes or half an hour, and then we can come back with questions. Otherwise, we won't know what is there in store for us. There are a lot of things we are going to miss. I'm waiting for him to go a little further and tell us some more things about our cosmology. I know that you guys have a lot of questions. Why don't we just wait for another 15-20 minutes, like let's say up to 7:30, we'll ask him to go a little further, and then we'll ask more questions. Okay, if you don't mind.
Alright. So getting back to the idea of the Big Bang cosmology. Now, like I mentioned, we can understand very close to the Big Bang, that is about 10 power minus 36 seconds after the Big Bang, where an event called as inflation happened. So what we mean by this is, by certain forces, which I'll talk about, or certain energies, which I'll talk about and call it as dark energy, there was a rapid expansion of the space, and it increased in size by a huge amount within a short fraction of a time. And this inflation also produced tiny ripples in an otherwise smooth universe. And these tiny ripples will play a significant role later. Okay. And after about 1 second, the universe cooled to about 10 to the power of 10 degrees. And you have your particles which make up your atoms, you have your protons, neutrons, electrons started forming here. Now, in this stage, the universe, the light, the photons are still interacting with the electrons, and these particles and photons are in something called in something like a soup, where there is no distinction between particles and photons exactly. Then again, about a few minutes after the Big Bang, when the temperature cooled by one more order, about 1 billion degrees, nucleus of the atom started forming. That is, the temperature cooled down so that protons and neutrons could combine to give you the nucleus of the atom. But even now, the light is interacting with the electrons, and as the universe started cooling, about 380,000 years after the Big Bang, a very major event took place when the temperature was about 3,000 degrees. Something called cosmic microwave background radiation was detected. Okay. This image will be quite known to you in case you are interested in anything to do with cosmology. This is something referred to as cosmic microwave background radiation. This is the earliest light that we can see in our universe. We cannot see anything further back because, as I mentioned here, till here light is interacting with electrons, making the universe opaque. You'll be able to see it only when light is able to escape something. So if light is getting trapped inside, then there is no way of figuring out what is there. So universe became transparent only when the neutral hydrogen atoms started forming. That's when light and matter were no longer interacting like before, and light was able to escape, and that light is what we see today as cosmic microwave background radiation. And then, as the universe again kept on expanding and evolving, about 1 billion years later, your first stars and galaxies started forming from these tiny ripples. If these ripples were not there, if the universe was perfectly smooth, then stars and galaxies will not form. These tiny ripples are indicated in this cosmic microwave background radiation, this image. There's an actual image with these different coloring here. So you have certain regions where the densities are higher, certain regions where the density is lesser. Those are your ripples in space. And from there you had the first stars and galaxies forming. And majority of these neutral hydrogen remained as hydrogen itself. So about 75% of the universe is your hydrogen. And one of you asked me what is the evidence for this Big Bang cosmology. One of the key evidences, even before stars and galaxies started forming, about 25% or slightly less than that, about 24% of this matter got converted to helium. So today we have about 74 to 75% is hydrogen and about 24% is helium, and everything else is less than that 1%. There is no way of making helium without stars if universe did not go through this phase. And that is how we know that there was an initial hot phase, which we call as a Big Bang phase. Okay, so that is one key evidence why there was a Big Bang that happened about 13.8 billion years ago. Because today, that whatever we see, that is 13.8 billion years later, all elements except hydrogen and helium, which I told you formed during this stage, were formed later in stars and the eventual death of stars. So the Big Bang created the initial hot stages, created the hydrogen and the helium, about 75 and 25, and remaining elements that you see. I'm sure you guys are familiar with the periodic table, all the naturally occurring elements, all the way till uranium, were formed in stars and the eventual death of stars. And today, understanding where this or how this cosmic microwave background came about and studying this cosmic microwave background can tell us where everything came from, including where all the matter came from and including where we eventually came from. So I have a small video here. There's a NASA video which illustrates what I just spoke to you about. There's no audio, but I hope you can see these. This is your earliest slide that we can see. I hope you can see the different coloring. There is blue and dark blue with yellow, red, and orange. It indicates these tiny disturbances in space. So you have certain dense regions, certain regions where the matter is lesser. So I'm just going to let this play through. And as you can see, wherever you had higher density, all the matter sort of starts collapsing because of gravity, and the first star starts forming, and these stars eventually come together to give you clusters of stars, which we call as galaxies. And galaxies themselves will form clusters called as clusters of galaxies and superclusters of galaxies. And this is what we see when we look back. And today when we observe, this is what we see. The earliest light was from that cosmic microwave background radiation. So how do we know this? You guys have asked me already, how do we know all this? This is where your observational cosmology comes in. You have either Earth-based observatories or you have space-based observatories which will try to map the night sky, which will try to look for light coming from different regions of the sky. The light could be from stars, could be from galaxies, could be from clusters. And when I say light, I don't mean only visual or optical light. Can you see this image with different color, different spectrum written here? This
Yes,
is,
sir.
Yes, sir.
all this is the image of the same Milky Way. These are all images of the Milky Way, but taken in different wavelengths. So I'm sure you're familiar with the electromagnetic spectrum, all the way from gamma rays to radio waves.
Yes, sir.
You're familiar with those wavelengths, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So this is how it looks when you look at it through optical. This is your optical. Let me just, yeah. This is your optical. You can see some regions are blocked out. Can you see these dark regions here? So there are certain regions that light is getting absorbed, so you're not able to see that region. But you see same image when I look through infrared telescope, or these are your different wavelengths of infrared telescopes. You can see it's completely different. The dark patches are no longer there. If you look at it from radio or microwaves, it looks completely different. If you go the other direction, if you look at it through X-rays, you see a bright spot here in X-rays and gamma rays, which is not visible anywhere here. So that means there are certain objects which is not giving out any optical light, but it's sending out a large amount of X-rays and gamma. Yeah. So by understanding the objects in different wavelengths, you are able to understand the structure and evolution of these stars or galaxies or clusters of galaxies. And that's where your observational cosmology comes into play. So what exactly is the universe made up of? So there is something called the visible universe. That is a universe that make up you and I, the stars, the planets, the galaxies. They're all made up of this visible universe. So let me just give you a brief, run you through a brief lifespan of a star. Okay. So as you saw in that video, wherever there was regions of higher density, you had these matter and gas and dust basically coming closer and closer because of gravity, and that is what we refer to as a protostar. It's not yet a star, it's the initial stage of a star. Now, if the protostar, the mass is very less, it will not become a star, it will end up as something called as a brown dwarf, and it will live out its life as a brown dwarf. It will not become a star. Now, when the mass of the protostar is higher, as it keeps on collapsing, eventually what will happen is the densities in the centers will become higher, pressure will become higher, temperatures will become higher. The temperature and pressure becomes high enough so that thermonuclear reaction takes place. You guys are familiar with nuclear fusion reaction?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So you have your lighter nuclei combining together to give you heavier nuclei. So here what happens is, in the case of brown dwarfs, the pressure and temperature is not high enough to start thermonuclear reaction. That's why it ends up as a brown dwarf, which is not a star. But if the pressure and temperature is high enough and the nuclear reaction starts, it will end up as a star. Depending on the mass of the initial protostar, it will either end up as a very small red dwarf, or it will end up as a sun-like star, or it will become something called as a supergiant. Okay. Now, what happens here is, let me switch on my video so that you can see what I'm doing with my hand. So basically what happens in the case of a star is, whenever anything has to be in equilibrium. I'm sure you are familiar with the term equilibrium.
Yes, sir.
Right? So for example, this cup is staying stationary because there are forces acting on it, and the net force on it is 0. All right. So can you quickly tell me what will be the forces acting on this cup?
So force of gravity.
Right,
And
gravity
force of
downwards.
normal force.
Your normal reaction upwards. Are we forgetting anything else?
Yeah, force.
You have your frictional force also, right? Between the, yeah. So what happens is, for equilibrium, the net force should be 0. All right. Now, for a star to remain as a star in equilibrium, what happens is, there are two forces which are trying to oppose each other. Two pressures which are acting in opposite directions. And one we have already seen is gravity, which is trying to pull it closer and closer. Okay. So constantly gravity is trying to compress the star closer and closer. But it's not happening because in the core of the star, your nuclear fusion reaction is taking place. Your hydrogen is becoming helium. Helium is again getting converted to heavier elements like carbon and oxygen and nitrogen and so on. All right. So as a result of these thermonuclear reactions, there is a thermonuclear pressure which is exerted in the outward direction. So you have your gravity pulling it inwards and thermonuclear pressure pushing it outwards. So as long as the two pressures are compensated, the star will remain in its equilibrium condition. And this is something we refer to as main sequence star. That is star which is in its prime, in its regular lifetime. Okay. So a star like our sun will remain in this state for about 10 billion years. That's why I told you the sun will decide our fate much before the merger of galaxies will happen, because the sun is about a mid-age star, so it is about 5 billion years old, and it will last for another 5 billion years, and the sun will eventually end up as something called as a red giant. If you have heavier stars, have you heard this adage called brightest flame burns the quickest? Have you heard that adage? The saying?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So basically the idea is when it is brighter, it will burn out faster because it will use fuel faster. So when you have more massive stars, its gravity is much higher. Agreed? Because more massive, more gravity. Right? So as a result, to compensate for that higher gravitational pressure, you need higher thermonuclear pressure. So the fuel inside gets burnt faster. So thermonuclear reactions happen faster. So they burn out faster, and the lifetimes of heavier stars are in millions of years, whereas sun is billions of years. So you see the difference, about 1,000 order difference. All right. Yeah? So brightest stars will burn out faster. It's like more powerful cars will be less fuel efficient. It will burn fuel faster because it's more powerful. All right. So same logic happens here also. Now, depending on the size of the star, the end stage of the star will be different. If the stars are much more massive, like Betelgeuse and Antares that we saw in the beginning slides, if the stars are massive, it will undergo something called as a supernova explosion. So basically what happens here is the fuel is getting used up, the inner part of the star, the core of the star, keeps getting compressed to smaller and smaller region, whereas the outer envelope of the star keeps expanding, looking for more and more fuel. So what happens here is the inner core is collapsing, the outer envelope is expanding. Now for a star like the sun, the outer envelope will expand to the orbit of beyond Mercury. So that means all the inner planets will be swallowed up by the sun in probably less than another 5 billion years. Okay, so Earth, Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, they'll all be vaporized by them. All right, yeah. And the outer envelope for smaller stars like the sun will just fizzle out. Okay, nothing spectacular happens; it just fizzles out, and the inner core of it will collapse into something called as a white dwarf. Let me just, something called as a white dwarf. Now, white dwarf is one possible end stage of a star whose mass is about less than 1.4 times the mass of the sun. That mass limit is referred to as Chandrasekhar limit. You guys have come across that terminology, Chandrasekhar limit?
Yes, sir.
So Chandrasekhar limit tells you whether the star will end up as a white dwarf or not. If the mass is lesser than the limit, it will be a white dwarf. Greater than that, it will not be a white dwarf. So our sun, for example, will end up as a white dwarf. Now, to give you an idea of how dense a white dwarf is, remember the slides I showed you, the size of the Earth and size of the sun? I hope you remember that. Imagine the mass of the sun compressed to the size of the Earth. That's the size and density of a white dwarf. That's how dense it is. Yes.
But when it becomes a nebulae, most of some of the insides will just spew out and form that nebulae, right?
Not the inside. That will be the outer envelope which gives you the nebula.
Okay, so then it is losing some mass in that process, right?
It will lose some of its mass, yes. So when the sun becomes a white dwarf, the mass of the white dwarf will not mass of the sun. It will be much less. Right. So the outer envelope just fizzles out, and that again condenses to form something called a planetary nebulae, from which a next generation star can be formed. So we know today that Sun is not a first generation star. It's at least a second or a third generation star. That means there was already a star which died. The outer part of it, nebulae, condensed to form another star. It died. That was the second generation. And the outer envelope again fizzled out, formed a nebulae, and our sun was formed from that. Okay, right? So that is one possibility of the eventual death of a star. Now, if the stars are a little bit more massive, if the stars are about 1.5 to about 3 or 5 times the mass of the sun, it will end up as something called a neutron star. Okay. Now, to give you an idea about the density of neutron stars, imagine the mass of much more than the mass of the sun compressed into size of Bangalore, about 10 kilometers to 20 kilometers. Okay, so the radius of a neutron star is about 10 to 20 kilometers. So imagine 2 times, 3 times the mass of the sun compressed to the size of Bangalore. That is how dense a neutron star is. The density of neutron star is so huge, if you were to take a teaspoon of neutron star, it will weigh few millions of tons. That's how dense it is. Okay, it's close to the density of the nucleus. You guys have learned about the nuclei. You know the density of nucleus roughly.
No, sir.
Sir, it is I think 10 to the power of minus 14 or 30.
Density. The size is about, yes. The size is about 10 power minus 15 centimeters. The density is about 10 power 17 kg per meter cube. Okay, so that is 1 followed by 17 zero, roughly. Okay. Now, if the mass of the star is even higher, about 5 times or 8 times or much higher than the mass of the sun, it will end up as something called as a black hole. I'm sure you guys have seen this image. This is a famous photograph, the first ever photograph taken of a black hole. Have you seen that image?
Sir, sun-like stars end up as neutron stars?
No, white dwarfs. They end up as white dwarfs.
Okay, sir.
Right. So now, when you look here, this donut shape that you see here is not a black hole. Black hole is a dense region at the center. The light that you see around is because of matter that is getting sucked in, and that kind of orbits around and gets ripped apart, and it's moving with a very high speed. And you guys have learned about something called as viscosity and drag forces. Yeah?
Yes, sir.
Because of that, this matter will get heated up because of these drag forces, because of the friction, or better term would be viscosity. All right, and that heats up this region around the black hole, and that is the light that is emitted that you're seeing. So this whole thing is not the black hole. Okay, the black hole is a tiny little thing at the center, which you can't directly see because the escape speed from a black hole is greater than the speed of light itself. That's why it's called as a black hole. Not even light can escape the gravity of a black hole. Okay.
Sir,
Yes?
one question.
Yes.
These black holes can do this gravitational tidal forces, right? Does the
That's
sun
right.
do the same thing?
Sun also has tidal forces. As a result, the trajectories of comets which pass very close to the sun is distorted. It's because of the tidal forces. Even on Earth, the tidal forces of sun is quite significant. It's because of sun and the moon that we have tides on Earth. So there are tidal forces. Yeah, but it's not strong enough to break up objects.
Okay. So the reason I asked is because like Jupiter itself can have tidal forces on its moons, which is why like even though it's so far away from the sun, it has some sort of inner heat.
Yes, it does.
Because of those tidal forces. So I was asking, does the sun from the sun's tidal forces, can that also produce heat?
No, because sun's energy, that is nuclear fusion, is much higher source than the tidal.
Sir?
Yes.
Sir, does the size of the black hole increase with time?
Yes, the size of the black hole, yes, definitely increases with time, because as matter keeps getting sucked into the black hole keeps increasing in size and mass. Yes, absolutely.
Sir, where does the matter go?
It gets sucked into the black hole, and what happens inside the black hole is again a big mystery, because not even light can come out of it, right? How do we know, how do we have any information about anything? How are you able to see your laptop or your phone? Because light is bouncing off it, right? Yeah. So all
Are there
inside-
any hypothetical theories?
Yes, there are various hypotheses as to what happens to matter inside a black hole, and one such hypothesis is the matter that gets sucked into a black hole is probably going through something referred to as a wormhole and coming out from the other side somewhere on another parallel universe through something called a white hole. But I have to put a very big disclaimer: it is completely hypothetical. There's absolutely no evidence to suggest the existence of anything called as a white hole or a wormhole. It's right now still under the realm of science fiction. Yes.
Sir, till what range is the effect of a black hole?
See, gravity has infinite range. Yeah? The effect of black hole is theoretically infinite, but substantially after a few tens of hundreds of light years, the effect becomes very negative. So it's effectively yeah.
Sir, I don't know whether my direction of thinking is right or not, but when it comes to Big Bang theory, can we formulate in this manner that before there was a universe where there was a huge black hole formed, and there is the black hole has sucked every matter present, including light. So because of increased matter and tension within the black hole, there is the Big Bang happening.
Okay, that's an interesting idea. There have been certain works on along these lines. If you're interested, I can send you some of the. Anyway, at the end of it, I'll share my contact details. There have been various proposals, but again, I have to put a disclaimer: these are only hypotheses with no observable evidence for it. Of course, there was one hypothesis which said that, like you suggested, what if all the black holes, matter inside a black hole, created a Big Bang inside each black hole? And our universe, what if it is existing inside the black hole of a bigger universe? And what if inside our black hole?
Sir, I just got the idea when you were explaining about
that
black hole. So I just
yes, there are certain hypotheses related to this. Yes.
So I heard of a theory, this hypothetical particle called tachyons.
Yes.
Can they escape the black hole's gravity?
Okay. Theoretically, the answer would be yes, because tachyons are particles hypothesized to have a speed greater than the speed of light. It was one of the proponents of that was an Indian physicist called George Sudarshan. But tachyons are not observed. We don't know if they exist or not. So far, there is no evidence for the existence of them. Right. So the answer would be if tachyons do exist, their speed is higher than the escape speed of black holes, then hypothetically they should escape. But we have not seen anything so far. So, yeah.
Excuse me, sir. So, sir, black holes' gravity is infinite. So, is it true that the Earth is constantly moving nearer the black hole?
Not necessarily. The black hole's gravity. I said the gravitational force in general has an infinite range. Okay. So technically, the Earth's gravity, you're feeling Earth's gravity. That's why you're sitting where you're sitting. Earth's gravity can be felt theoretically even at the other end of the universe, but practically that is not possible because the value diminishes very fast. You're familiar with Newton's law of gravity, the formula for Newton's law of gravity?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, it goes as 1 by r squared, right? So as you go farther and farther away, the force of gravity becomes that much negligible. All right. So even the black hole's gravity, the range is technically, theoretically infinite, but beyond a certain distance, it becomes extremely negligible. So the effect of the black hole's gravity is felt only in the immediate surroundings of the black hole. Okay.
Sir, a hypothetical situation. So let's say a black hole forms between a Milky Way and Andromeda. Is that going to fasten the process of them colliding?
Not really. The net mass of the two galaxies are going to decide the rate at which they are moving closer to each other. So the mass of the black hole is integral to the mass of the galaxy itself. So Andromeda galaxy and the Milky Way galaxy, both of them have a very massive black hole at the center of their galaxy. So the total mass includes the black hole mass also, and it's the total mass of the galaxy which decides how fast and what is the time scale in which they are going to merge. Okay?
Sir, I have a doubt. The gravity of black hole is infinite, as you said, and gravitational force acts only on particles which have mass. But as we know, light doesn't have any mass. So why doesn't it escape?
Oh, okay. Interesting. Okay. Here I should digress a little bit because how many of you have heard of this guy called Albert Einstein, the guy with the crazy head? Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
All right. So he has a theory called as the theory of relativity, where he proposed something called as an equivalence principle. Okay. So the idea is one of the equivalences, matter and energy are equivalent. Okay. So when we say gravity affects only mass, gravity is also equivalent to mass. So light is pure energy. Energy is also equivalent to mass. Yeah. You're familiar with the equation E is equal to mc square?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah?
Yes, sir.
Probably that's the equation which appears more on coffee mugs and t-shirts than textbooks. Right? So I'm sure most of you would have come across that. So any mass has an equivalent energy, or any energy, you can think of it as an equivalent mass. So light, photons have energy, so that means it has an equivalent mass, but doesn't have an actual mass. Okay, so that's why even light comes under the influence of gravity. I see some people have raised their hand. Yeah, what is? Can I know why?
Sir, actually, there is a question from Shivani Avathani. She is asking that the universe in the universe at a moment there can be many stars releasing huge amount of energy. Will this affect the overall temperature of the universe?
Oh, okay. The idea that the overall temperature of the universe, the interstellar space, that is space between stars, is extremely cold. Okay. Intergalactic space, that is a space between galaxies, is even more rarer, as in the matter density is extremely low. Right? So there the temperature is extremely small. Of course, the stars do emit a lot of energy. There are plenty of stars and plenty of galaxies. There are estimated to be about 100 billion, that is 10 to the power of 11 stars, and there are about 10 to the power of 11 or 12 galaxies in the universe, and all of them do emit energy, but their effects are pretty local. In the sense, once you go even up to Pluto, the temperatures can go about 150 degrees below 0 degrees Celsius. Okay, so that close to the sun itself, that is within our own solar system, the temperatures can drop that rapidly. Okay, so it doesn't affect the overall temperature of the universe, but it affects the temperature in the vicinity of the star. Okay.
So what is the range of the energy produced by this star?
Range again, just like your gravity has a 1 by r square dependence, your electromagnetism also has a 1 by r square dependence. Have you come across Coulomb's law?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, that again has a 1 by r square dependence. I'm of course being very crude here. Of course, you have to talk about electromagnetism, not just electrostatics. But even in the case of electromagnetism, that is light and the basic aspects of light, it has a 1 by r square dependence. So the intensity falls off as 1 by r square. Okay. So you go twice the distance, the intensity falls off 1/4. Yeah.
So there's another question from Shivani Avadhani.
Yes.
So she has heard that every object near the black hole will be like sucked into it like contraction. So if the number of black holes increase, can it outpass the rate of expansion of universe and lead to universe contraction rather?
Okay. The expansion rate of the universe is determined by the total mass of the universe and not just on the black hole. Okay. So what we have to realize is, even though black holes are pretty massive, say for example, in our Milky Way, you have, I think, about 3 million solar mass black holes. That means the mass of the black hole at the center of our Milky Way is 3 million times the sun's mass. Okay. But still, that is only a fraction of the total mass of the galaxy, because the galaxy has about 10 to the power of 11 stars. Okay. So the expansion of the universe is determined by the total mass of the galaxies and clusters of galaxies in the universe, and not only on the black hole. Okay. So even if the black hole is sucking in matter, the total mass of the galaxy is still the same. Okay.
So how are black holes created? Like, they can appear in different areas of the universe, right?
Okay, black holes are created because of the collapse of stars, okay, or collapse of large number of stars into something called supermassive black holes. So what happens here is, like I told you, when you have a massive star, extremely massive star, the gravity takes over, the thermonuclear reaction, the pressure due to that is not enough to keep gravity from collapsing. So all the matter collapses into a dense region. That is how a black hole is created. Yeah.
Excuse me, sir.
Giridhar, 1 second. So just a small time check. So we have now 7:45. Okay, actually our scheduled time is to end at 8 o'clock. I'm sure that still a lot of lot many more maybe there, and children also they have got such a nice professor to answer the questions to you. So you want to ask more questions, I know. I think we will arrange one more time with little more deeper into these things with you guys. So today another 15 minutes is there. I think you can continue asking questions for some more time. But I just request Arun sir to basically tell us also, last 10 minutes we wanted to talk a little bit about astrophysics as a career opportunity. What is there for children? That kind of a thing. We wanted him to speak about 10 minutes or so. Maybe another 5-10 minutes we can continue with this. After that he can talk about that. I mean, it's left to, I'll leave it to him.
Okay, all right. So I think I'll now talk to you about, since that question also came up, I'll talk to you about something that we don't see. Okay. I told you about visible universe, and as it turns out, only about 5% of the universe that we have, the total energy of the universe, only about 5% or less than 5% is what make up stars, galaxies, planets, you and I. So remaining 95% of the universe is something that is not visible to us. And that is what we refer to as dark matter and dark energy. And I'll quickly just tell you why we think there is dark matter. Okay, and there's again from our basic understanding, for Earth to be in orbit around the Sun, you know that centrifugal forces should balance each other, right? For any circular orbit, for that matter, right? So here, in the case of Earth going around the Sun, the gravity provides the center. If Neptune, for example, had the same which is going around the Sun as Mercury, then what will happen is, you have the Sun here, you have the planet going around, gravity is pulling it inwards, and centrifugal force, that is mv squared by r, is pushing it out. Now, if the speed of Neptune was higher, then this force will make the planet get kicked out of the solar system. Do we all agree with that logic?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Now let's apply the same logic to galaxies. Okay, so you have these denser regions, the core galaxy, and as you go farther away, the stars are lesser. So what is expected is the stars in this region should be faster compared to stars here. Just like Mercury is faster compared to planets which are farther away. As you go farther away from the center of the galaxy, we expect the stars to travel with lesser speed.
Yeah.
But they observe that the stars are actually traveling with the same speed or sometimes even higher speed without getting kicked out. So that led to the conclusion that there should be matter around which is keeping these stars in place without getting kicked out. But these matter that we can't see is dubbed as dark matter. Okay, so that is the evidence that we have for the existence of something called as dark matter. On the other hand, the evidence for dark energy is something quite different. Now, imagine you throw this is the surface of the earth, okay, and you take a stone and you throw it up, okay. What do we expect? It will stop here and fall back. Exactly. So same thing when you have the initial Big Bang and all the galaxies started expanding. Here the Earth's gravity was causing the stone to come back down. It was expected that the galaxy's gravity will eventually cause the expansion to slow down. Correct? Just like the speed with which a stone goes up, won't the speed keep decreasing as it goes higher up?
Yes.
Yes.
So same way, the rate of expansion was expected to slow down. But
So if it was to slow down, what would cause the gravity, like for it to slow down?
Because of all the galaxies. The galaxies have mass. Any mass will create gravity, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Right. So when they found out, when they actually observed this, they wanted to observe how much is this slowing down happening. Now, not only did they find that it is not slowing down, they found that this expansion is in fact speeding up. So it's something like you take a stone. Yeah.
Sir, but what if we are still in the going till the part where it comes back down stage?
We are not talking about coming back down. Even in the going up stage, shouldn't the speed decrease?
No, but initially when you throw a ball up, it will increase its speed for some time before.
Are we sure?
No, actually, that is a bit stupid of me.
Yeah. So the
No,
speed
but what
will
if it's
possibly
reducing at
decrease,
such a
right?
low rate that it's not really measurable?
No, they have actually measured that it's actually increasing with a significant rate.
Okay.
Yeah? So it's similar to, you find out that the velocity of the stone is not decreasing, but in fact it's speeding up. It's as if somebody has fitted some rocket on the stone, and this rocket is causing it to accelerate. So this rocket, this acceleration that is producing this expansion is what is referred to as dark energy. And we have no clue what exactly is this dark matter and dark energy. And that is what makes it fascinating. Okay. And why I tell you it is fascinating is because it will decide what the future of the universe will be. Depending on this dark energy and the amount of dark energy, the expansion might continue forever. All the galaxies will get ripped apart. All the stars will get ripped apart. Something referred to as a big rip scenario. If dark energy turns out to be not what we expected, the galaxies might eventually slow down its expansion, like the stone reaching the height. It will stop its expansion and start compressing again, eventually come back together like how it was in the beginning. And this scenario is called as a big crunch scenario. Yes,
Sir, and one thing, and the other scary thing is that if the acceleration goes higher than the speed of light, then things will be moving so fast that we won't even be able to see anything.
Exactly.
Because the light is not fast enough to reach us.
Exactly. So if this big rip scenario were to happen, if the acceleration keeps on increasing, then we will eventually reach a stage where our universe will be confined to a very small region of our galaxy alone, because all the other galaxies will be accelerating so fast, light will not be able to reach. You're absolutely right. Yeah. And
So I understand the part
And,
where
it
light can't
won't-
reach.
sorry.
So I didn't understand why light can't reach.
Oh, okay.
Like, does it die out or something?
So imagine you're here, right? There is another galaxy here which is moving away from us. You're able to see it because the light is reaching you, right?
Yes, sir.
Now imagine the acceleration of this expansion is so high that the space is getting expanded at a speed greater than the speed of light.
Oh, yes, sir. Got it.
Yeah. So the light will not be able to reach you at all, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. That's why we will not be able to see them. And why I tell you it's a very interesting time is because if you go by the Nobel Prize is given, last year's Nobel Prize was shared by half was shared by Roger Penrose, who worked on black hole, the theory of black holes, and Genzel and Guest, who worked on observations of black holes. They shared the Nobel Prize. So the prize went for cosmology. 2019, half the prize was shared by Peebles, who did it for cosmology, and the other two who worked on something called as exoplanets. Those are planets. I didn't get time to talk on it. Those are planets which are detected outside our solar system. Again, in cosmology and astrophysics. 2017 prize went to Weiss, Barish, and Kip Thorne. How many of you have seen the movie called Interstellar?
I have.
Yes, sir.
Okay. In fact, Kip Thorne was one of the consultants for the movie Interstellar. Okay. So again, their work on gravitational waves and cosmology. Again, 2017 prize was Nobel Prize. Way back in 2011, it was shared by Perlmutter, Schmidt, and Weiss. Remember, I told you about that expansion. They found out it was accelerating. These people are credited with that discovery. So again, it went for cosmology. In 2006, again, Smoot and Matter, they won the prize for work on microwave background radiation, which I spoke to you about earlier. And way back in 1978, you have the prize shared by Kapitsa and by Penzias and Wilson. And Penzias and Wilson are the people who quite accidentally discovered microwave background radiation for the first time. And they won the Nobel Prize.
They were
shared the
trying
Nobel
to clean
Prize.
a satellite dish or something when they did that, right?
They were cleaning an antenna at the Bell Laboratory. And half the prize was shared by Kapitsa, and I usually suggest this to all the students of your age group. Kapitsa is famous for something called Kapitsa problems. So if you happen to get your hands on Kapitsa problems, they are very interesting problems based on your high school 11th and 12th physics syllabus itself. And it's a very interesting way in which problems are asked, because he will tell you that a room has something, you have to calculate something. He won't give you the dimensions of the room, because you need to understand or have a basic idea of what should be the dimensions of a room. All right. So it gives you kind of real world kind of situation. So if you're interested, you can check it out. So I think with that, I will stop this part of my presentation, and I'll quickly probably give you an overview on the careers in cosmology or astrophysics in general. So this is a brief flowchart on what you can do after your 12th standard or your second PUC if you want to take up a career in astronomy and astrophysics. So basically, there are three ways of going about it. Either you can take up pure sciences, you do your bachelor's, your master's, and you have these national level examinations which will get you into PhD in astronomy and astrophysics. Or you can do your engineering, and you can either do MTech, or in some very rare cases with students who show exceptional aptitude in research, you have a direct entrance through JEST into PhD, or after your MTech you can get into your PhD program. So there's a brief flowchart on how to go about if you're pursuing a career in astronomy and astrophysics. And these are some of the centers in India which offer master's program in astrophysics.
Sir, can you go back to the previous slide, please?
Yeah, this one?
The next one.
This one?
Yeah.
Okay, this is, yeah. These are, if, in case you're interested in pursuing it abroad, this is the basic flowchart if it's Europe or Australia, and this is if it's in the US. Of course, they require subject-specific and English-specific exams. Yeah. And these are some of the centers which offer master's program in astrophysics. And these are centers which offer PhD programs in astrophysics. Bangalore, of course, has Raman Research Institute and IAA exclusively for astrophysics. IAA is Indian Institute of Astrophysics. Then you have RRI, which is an astrophysics program. IASC has a joint astronomy program. And of course, you have Ayuka, PRL, Nainital, and you have all these ICERs and some of the IITs which also offer your PhD programs in astrophysics. Okay. Yep. So if you have any questions, you can ask me. I'm of course going to share my contact details, so you can get in touch with me anytime. Shall I just get out of this and share my contact details? These are a couple of, I hope you can see my screen. Yeah?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. These are a couple of resources if you're interested in astronomy and astrophysics and astrobiology. And these are the contact details. You can get in touch with. I will probably, it will help you if I just put it in the chat box.
I think well, I would like to just conclude a little bit, talk about, we also have with us some of the teachers also with us watching your this one. I think I will ask Vijay sir to say a few words, one or few words. He's been actually teaching children from 8th to 10th. I am working mostly on 11th and 12th. So I'll just ask him to say a few words what he liked.
Hello sir.
Hello, sir. I mean, at the outset, it has been, I mean, it was great listening to you for at multiple levels, right? I mean, subject-wise, as many questions, varied questions as children were asking with so much of excitement. It was, I mean, the questions themselves were very new for me. So, right. So, listening to your answers, but what appealed to me most was, I mean, I was awed by, like, I mean, as a person who is trying to be a teacher of science someday going forward, there was, I mean, the way you were handling the whole session, like, I mean, not getting bogged down with probably whatever content you had planned, the enormous patience at questions and the articulation. Like, I mean, every sentence used was something that was within our comprehension. We may not get the depth or the content of it because we may not have the background, but the clarity of the thought flow. I mean,
thank you so much.
Yeah, it was beautiful.
Thank you.
Like, I mean,
Very kind. Yeah. Thank you.
Right. Yeah. That's the thing that has stayed with me most. And yeah, I mean, I've told sir, I mean, as and when they were happening, like, I mean, this really excites me. I mean, this sort of teacher is what I want to become someday. So
thank you. That's very kind. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, sir.
It's great. And I also actually happened to listen to him for some few, maybe 10-15 minutes one day. So that day I decided that we have to get him to talk to our students. So that's how it is. It's very nice.
Now that people are expressing wish list too, probably if I can say, like, I mean, see, one is whatever classical physics we do at the high school level and I mean, PU level, right? I mean, after that I went into engineering and the job and all that. So as far as physics is concerned, I'm pretty much at the same level as most of the students who are there here. So, like, I mean, for us, from between classical physics and this deep cosmology, there is a long gap. So if we can have some topic in between, like, I mean, something that can take us from where we are to a point wherein we can more analytically understand whatever is spoken. some such series of like 2-3 topics maybe in
That is
sequence.
that is a good idea. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not just one lecture, a series of some 2 or 3 lectures. Yeah.
Yeah.
That'll also be a good idea.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for coming and giving this such a wonderful talk. And I'm sure the children have thoroughly enjoyed, and they may be even feeling that I came in the middle and spoiled their questions. But
I would like to. I want to thank you, sir, for giving me the opportunity because, like I mentioned in the beginning, it's there's something which I will not stop talking about because not only because it's my area of interest, but generally, this is something which I like sharing with, especially kids of this age. With their interest and curiosity to learn and learn new things. So thank you, sir, for the opportunity.
Thanks a lot for coming. Thanks a lot. So thanks, guys. Children, you have gone through wonderful questions, and some of them are really original and thought-provoking.
Let me also thank the students for those wonderful questions because each session is different because the kind of questions and the insight you get from the students is quite different. So let me thank students for helping me with this wonderful session. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.